Okay, very good. So now you remember that we were discussing impulse generator circuit where this is what we have studied, that there will be a H condenser, CS, then this CS will be charged from a high voltage DC source. For that there will be a charging resistor. Then, then there will be a somebody is making a lot of noise. See, some student is making very much noise through their mic. So, who is it? Is either TV or something is working or what? Showdeep Sen, you mute yourself. Okay, so now then you have a fast acting switch, and I explained that this should be a sphere gap. Then there will be two resistances, one in series, one in parallel. The parallel one is called discharge resistor, the series one is called damping resistor, and one capacitor called the load condenser or load capacitor CB. Now I was telling that if my output voltage is say 800 kV or 1000 kV, then we cannot have a single capacitor because it is just not possible to make it. So we need a multi-stage circuit. So I will show you this is exactly what the multi-stage circuit is. So we start with the CS. Here you can see CS, but there are not one CS, but there are four CS here. CS1, CS2, CS3, CS4. You can see here parallel, they are all parallel. On the left side of CS1, you can see at the bottom it is written as DC generating section. And if you look at this DC generating section, this is a very typical Cockcroft-Walton voltage doubler circuit. So in Cockcroft-Walton voltage doubler circuit, we have exactly this, that a low voltage variable source, high voltage transformer, then we have first one capacitor here, then two diodes, and then a second capacitor. But here the second capacitors are actually the CS1 and other CS in parallel. These are the second group of capacitors. That's why this left side, this DC generating section is nothing but a Cockcroft-Walton voltage doubler circuit. In the middle, where you have this multiple stage capacitors with some resistances, these are, this section is called voltage multiplying section. And in the end on the right side, this is very typical of that single stage circuit. That means there is one capacitor in series with the load condenser, one capacitor in parallel, so that is the discharge resistor in the right bottom, and RD2 right bottom is the damping resistor. So this is the circuit. Now let me explain how it works. First is charging circuit. I am not going because that's typical Cockcroft-Walton voltage doubler circuit. And you can see the point A, C, E, and G. They are all connected to the doubler circuit through a charging resistor, RCH. So all the four capacitors are charged in parallel so that they will be charged at the same voltage. So let's say the voltage across all of them is say V. So they are charged up to a certain voltage V. Then there are certain sphere gaps which are connected like A to B. This sphere gap has some series resistance. Similarly, S2, S3, and S4. Now, when these capacitors are being charged, at that point, this sphere gap should not fire. How do I ensure it? We have to put enough gap distance between the two spheres so that the sphere gaps do not fire. But at the same time, we have to also ensure that when it fires, it should fire sequentially. That means S1 first, followed by S2, S3, and S4. Now, as long as S4 does not fire, the voltage at the point G is never connected to the output circuit. Now, how does it all happen? So, consider that all the four capacitors are charged up to a voltage V, and these gaps S1, S2, S3, S4, we have to trigger them sequentially. So what we do is we keep the gap distance. If we say D1 for S1, then D2 for S2, D3 for S3, and D4 for S4. These are the gap distance. We will set them accordingly that D1 is slightly less than D2, D2 is slightly less than D3, D3 is slightly less than D4, which means D1 will be the lowest value of the gap distance, D4 will be the highest value of the gap distance. And they should be such that D1, the lowest value, should not break down at the charging voltage of the capacitor. If it is V, then it should not break down at V. But now what happens? Let's say now all the capacitors are charged up to a voltage V. At this condition, we have to fire this super generator, and we have to fire it in such a way that their voltages should be added. That means these capacitors must be connected in series. Now what happens? By some means, which I will explain, this is called triggering of the generator. This first S1 gap is fired. Then what happens? The point A is immediately connected to point B. Now point A, let's say, is the positive terminal of CS1. Then point B is definitely negative terminal of CS2. So if A is connected to B, then CS1 and CS2 are connected in series. What happens now? The total voltage across S2 immediately becomes 2V. It is no longer V. Earlier, the voltage across S2 was V. Why? Because all the capacitors are charged up to V. So A, C, E, they are all at V potential, and B, D, etc. are all at R potential. So these sphere gaps were having a voltage difference of V. But now, the moment S1 breaks down, the point A is immediately connected to B, and then CS1 and CS2 immediately are in series. So the voltage across S2 becomes 2V, and then it will automatically fire because of the very high voltage. Then the voltage across S3 will become 3V, it will fire. Voltage across S4 will become 4V, it will fire. So our job is that initially keep the distances, the gap distances in a increasing order from S1 to S4, and the gap distance D1 for S1 must be such that it should not break down at the charging voltage of CS1, and at the required voltage, we will trigger the gap of S1 by some means, so that now there will be a cascading effect of voltage, and at the point H we will get 4V. So that now when the charging of CB takes place, it will not be at V, but it will be with respect to 4V. So therefore at output, we will not get 4V because of the charging of CB, we will lose some amount of voltage. So it will be slightly less than 4V. And when this happens, think carefully that this RT1 in series with S1, RD1 in series with S2. When these capacitors are connected in series, all these resistances are also connected in series with the CS, which means that they will be connected in series with CS and CB. Or in other words, they are damping resistors of the single stage circuit. Similarly, if you see that RE here in the right bottom is in parallel with CB. But look at that, this terminal RE2, this common terminal here, then through H, F, etc., this goes to R. So that there are certain RE1 here which will come in series, and then that series combination will come in parallel with RE2. Look at the circuit RE2, this is the common terminal here. Then from here, this RE1, they are in series and then they goes to R. So 4 RE1 and RE2 are in parallel. So these are called, this RE1 are called discharge resistor. But since they are distributed in nature, so RD1, they are called distributed damping resistor. Then RE1 are called distributed discharge resistor. Whereas RE2 is called lump discharge resistor, RD2 is called lump damping resistor. Generally, this outside, we cannot control them. What we can control is only this lump parameter, which is outside the generator, so that we can disconnect this resistance, connect a new one. Like that, we can use different values of resistance and adjust the time constant. So that's why this right bottom side is written as wave shaping section. Comes from the previous one. But now when it fires, that is the gap fires, then what happens? 4 CS, they come in series. That means these 4 capacitances come in series, and then 2 RD1, they come in series also. So here you can see CS1, 2 RD1, this is stage 1. Stage 1 means here, the leftmost block. Then CS2, 2 RD1, stage 2. So you see CS2 to RD1, stage 2. Then CS3 to RD1, stage 3. So CS3 to RD1, stage 3, and CS4 to RD1, stage 4. So each rectangle is actually just one block or one stage. So finally we have 4 CS and 4 to RD1 in series. Then comes S4. Then this is my S4, and then 4 RE1, 4 RE1, they are in parallel with RE2 because RE2 is connected to R. This is the common point, and 4 RE1 is connected to R. This is the common point. So 4 RE1 comes in parallel with RE2, and then you have RD2 and CB. And the output is taken across CB. That is, the impulse output is taken across CB. So this is the equivalent for CS in parallel, sorry, in series. So they become CS by N, where N is a generalized number. Then 2RD1 into N is the number of stage. So 2NRD1. Then SN, that means the gap at the nth stage. Then NRE1. But RE2, RD2, and CB, there is no N. They are the single values. So now we just, for simplification, we can put 2NRD1 in series with RD2 because RE values are much higher compared to RD. This is the operational part. Now I will give you a problem. How we solve this problem. Design an 8-stage impulse generator to generate 1400 kV with voltage efficiency of 96%. The energy stored in the impulse generator is 16 kilojoule and the input DC voltage is 175 kV. So now you have all the parameters. So how do we use it? This is like the equivalent circuit here. Here you see the equivalent circuit. Just look at only the two capacitors. If we forget about the resistance, they are connected in this form, right? Where this capacitor is charged with a certain voltage. So this is that combination, and if you do that, then V2 by V1, this becomes our voltage efficiency. This is like a potential divider, and so we write this equation. C equivalent is nothing but the combined or the equivalent resistance of the source capacitances or the stage capacitances. In this case, we have 8-stage impulse generator. So the value of N, that is the number of stage, is 8. And this is given as 96%. So we can write that this ratio is 90 or 0.96. Fine. Then for the 8 stages, there will be 8-stage capacitors. That means this capacitors here. There will be 8 such capacitors. Therefore, and the charging voltage is 175 kV. So half CV square into 8. There are the 8 capacitors. They are all charged up to 175 kV is equal to 16 kilojoule. So what we get? CS, that means the individual stage capacitance is 0.1306 microfarad. But they are all in series, so the equivalent capacitance is CS by N. So N is 8, so C equivalent is CS by 8. It is 16.32 nanofarad. Then we put this ratio of 9.96, we find CB as 0.68 nanofarad. So from here we can get the values of CS and CB, what we have to give. But we have to also get the required wave front time and wave tail time. So wave front time is typically, I have already shown that when this capacitance, that means earlier I have shown you here. Here. This is the circuit which I showed you, that this stage capacitor charges the load capacitor. Now here it is CS by 8, that is the C equivalent. Then we have RT and we have CB. Now, by the way, we are not going through the exact transform circuit. Of course, we can do that, but we are solving it through this approximate equivalent circuit. When this happens, that C equivalent, this capacitor charges CB over a resistance R, then we can say, see, this is the equation of the charging voltage. That means V, which is the voltage across CB, will be V, which is the voltage or the DC voltage appearing across CS, then 1 minus e to the power minus T by lambda, where lambda is the time constant. Now, how do we find it? We have to get the required wavefront time. So, as I have already told, wavefront time is calculated from T90 and T30. That means 90% of the peak value and 30% of the peak value. So, how do we get it? So, T30 is, you see, V by V becomes 0.3. So, you can calculate from here, this becomes particularly this expression. If V is 0.3 capital V. So T30, that is here, e to the power minus T30 by lambda, you can write this expression. Then you say V by small v by capital V is 0.9 and this e to the power minus T90 by lambda. So T90 becomes this. So front time is T90 minus T30 by zero point 0.9 minus zero point 0.3, which I have explained last class, that similar triangle concept. So now put it here. So you get that front time is 3.243 into lambda. What is the lambda? Lambda is, of course, you know. So here you can see that lambda is RC, and RC, C is here the series combination of equivalent capacitance and the load capacitance. So 1.2 microsecond, which is the front time, is equal to 3.24 lambda. So 3.243 here on the left side into R into C, and this R is RD. So since already you have calculated C equivalent and load condenser, so we put the values, we get RD as 566.8 ohm. Then we do the tail time calculation, and this is done using the discharge characteristics of RC circuit. And in the discharge circuit, again, let me show you the previous one, where it is here. This is how it is being discharged. So CS and CP in parallel, they discharge through RD and RE. So we take the same approximate circuit, and in the discharge circuit, the output voltage is always given by this. So here V is the peak value, and we are going from peak value to the 50% of the peak value, because that is how it is defined, that with tail time. So we say this is T50, and V by small v by capital V is 0.5. So we get that T50 is 0.693 lambda. And lambda is definitely parallel combination of C multiplied by series combination R, RC. But this T50, this is not the tail time, because this V is equal to capital V to the power minus T by lambda. This T is always calculated from the peak value. And peak value occurs at 1.1 microsecond. But 50 microsecond tail time, that is always computed from the virtual zero. So what do we do? So we take 50 microsecond minus the wavefront time. That becomes the time from the peak of the wave. So we put that as the T50, that is from the peak, not from the virtual zero. Give is equal to 0.693 into lambda, and lambda is the R into C, and that comes approximate equivalent circuit, and we get RE plus RT is equal to 4142 ohm. So RE is 3575 ohm. So you can see RD is 566 ohm, RE is 3575 ohm. So it is 7 times greater than RD. So this is how a computation can be done. If you need a very rigorous computation, then of course we will have to go for the Laplace transform circuit and get that equation, and of course we will have to solve a far more complicated equation, but that we are not doing. We are happy with this computation using the approximate equivalent circuit, and for your course that should be enough. Now I have already told you that impulse generator has to be triggered. If there are multiple sphere gaps in an impulse generator, it is always required that the first stage breaks down at the desired voltage and in the desired instant, and there should be breakdown of the other gaps automatically. How do we ensure? One thing already I have said, that there has to be a graded value of the sphere gaps. The first stage gap will have the minimum value, then gradually it will increase, and the last stage will have the highest value. But then, how do I trigger the first stage at the desired instant and the desired voltage? Well, we do it in this way, that this is called a triggertron gap. So first stage gap is actually called a 3 electrode gap. So we have the one electrode or the one sphere which is connected to the high voltage. We have the other sphere which is connected to the earth. That means if I go back to the circuit here, the top sphere is the high voltage sphere connected to point A, the bottom sphere is connected to point B. This is the stage 1 gap. This will be a 3 electrode gap. And this second sphere, which is connected to point B, will have a special construction. What is that? Here. This sphere, the right hand side, will have a small opening here, like a small hole. And at the back side, there will be an insulating arrangement. This hatched portion is an insulator through which a third electrode comes in. The sphere is, of course, arched. Now, please remember that between the two spheres, we have air. And this third electrode has certain potential that will supply. So between this sphere, arc sphere, and the third electrode, there is an electric field. So initially, when you don't want to trigger the gap, there is a certain gap distance D1. This is the gap S1 of the figure. So we keep it the gap distance D1, which is such that it will not break down at the required charging voltage. Now, when the required charging voltage has been achieved, at that point of time, we apply a pulse voltage of 10 to 12 kV at this third electrode. Gap between arc sphere and the third electrode is such that this pulse voltage will make this gap to break down. Whenever there is a breakdown, remember this is within this sphere gap, this volume, but then it will generate enough amount of positive and the negative charges. And remember that between the two main spheres, there is already a significant amount of field generated because of the high voltage. And because of that field, these charges which are being generated, they will move towards the main gap. As soon as these charges reach the main gap, then this main gap is unable to withstand the voltage and there will be breakdown between the two main spheres, or in other words, the sphere gap will fire. So again I repeat how we work. First we keep the gap distance D1 of this particular gap sufficiently large so that it will not break down at the required charging voltage. When it has been charged to the required charging voltage, then we apply a pulse of 10 kV to the third electrode. Because of this, there will be a breakdown between arc sphere and the third electrode. The third electrode is not touching the sphere. They are insulated for more than 10 kV. So this breakdown will generate enough amount of charges. And since there is already a field existing in the main gap, because of that field, electrostatic attraction, these charges will move towards the main field. And since these charges are conducting in nature and they arrive in between the two spheres, the sphere gap will fire. This is almost, electronic breakdown, extremely fast and quite reliable breakdown. In fact, if you ask me for 1985 onwards, I have seen this arrangement in our laboratory. I have never seen a single time that it is not functioning well. It is so reliable. How do we generate the trigger pulse? Well, it is quite simple. First, we have a DC voltage source. It can be battery or it can be a voltage source. Forget about the polarity changing switch that we will discuss later. Here we have a transformer, but this transformer is a very special transformer. It is called a pulse transformer. I think you might be knowing, or if you don't know, you just study it. Pulse transformers are a special category of transformers which work when a pulse is applied to its primary. Please remember that pulse is also a DC because there is a change of polarity, but there is a change of voltage with time. That means dV/dt. So if there is a change of voltage with time, then there will be a change of flux linkage, and that will induce a voltage in the secondary. This is the principle of operation of pulse transformer. Because you know that transformer operates on the principle of change of flux linkage, and the flux linkage is again linked with what type of, you know, particularly the magnetizing current that flows. And if that is of the nature of pulse, definitely it will work. So what we do is we apply a DC voltage to the primary, not permanently, just for small time. So we switch on, press S1. By the way, S1 and S2, there are two switches. They are connected mechanically. That means when they are on, both are on. When they are off, both are off. So when S1 switch closes, S2 also closes. So this capacitor C comes in parallel with the secondary. So when we switch on S1, then the current through the primary starts increasing and there will be a voltage generated. But then this C, which is uncharged, so it will act as a short circuit across the secondary. So the voltage will not go to the third electrode on the right side. Now, after only a few seconds, we switch off S1, then S2 is also switched off. Then the moment S1 is switched off, then the current which was already flowing, that will become zero. So there will be a change of current. And this will be acting as the magnetizing current. So there will be change of flux linkage, secondary voltage will be induced. But now S2 is open, so C is no longer connected in parallel. So whatever voltage is generated, that will go to the third electrode. And the bottom terminal will go to the earth electrode. So a pulse will be generated. Typically, the turns ratio of this pulse transformer will keep such a way that a 10 kV or 12 kV pulse will be generated. Now, since impulse can be both positive and negative, so the third electrode need to be either positive or negative both. So we have a polarity changing switch, which is very simply, it changes the polarity of the DC voltage. Accordingly, the direction of current in the primary will change and the voltage induced in the secondary will be of the opposite polarity. So this is how this trigger pulse is generated. Then there is a practical problem of recording impulse. For example, we record it with the help of cathode oscilloscopes, which were earlier. Now we have the digital oscilloscope. Whether it is a digital or analog doesn't matter. In our when we were young, analog zeros. Today everything is digital, but still it is a oscilloscope. So now in an oscilloscope, you always, I think you might have studied that there are always two plates. One we call the Y, the other we call the X. Now the X plate always has a base signal, which is typically a sawtooth waveform. Whereas this is called the time-based signal. Whereas the signal that we want to record should come on the Y plate. Now here is my impulse generator on the left, whereas the CRO is in the control room, because remember this is very high voltage, so we cannot stand inside the lab. Everything has to be within the control room, which is protected. That is quite a distance away. So here from the impulse generator output, first we put a potential divider, because 100 kV or 200 kV we cannot supply it to the CRO. So there is a potential divider, and from the low voltage arm of the potential divider, we take this voltage, a small voltage, to the CRO, to the Y plane. But the issue is that CRO has a typical property that if the time-based circuit is not on, if a signal comes on the Y plate, it will not be recorded. So it means that before the signal comes to the Y plate, the time base should be triggered. But how it can be done? Because exactly when the impulse will come, we don't know. That will depend on my pulse generator and then triggering of the third electrode and so on. So we don't depend on any manual triggering. We go for an automatic system. This is very another not a very complicated system. So what we do, we put an antenna very close to the impulse generator. It's a very normal antenna. It picks up the electromagnetic radiation when the sphere gap fires. Then that signal immediately comes through a cable to the X plane. So the time base is started. Whereas the impulse comes to the Y plate through a cable which we call a delay cable. That means this cable incorporates an intentional delay in the wave propagation of the impulse. So this antenna signal comes without any delay. So time base is fired first, whereas the Y plate is triggered later with a delay. So that means when the Y signal comes, the time base is already on. So the entire signal will be recorded. The entire impulse wave will be recorded. But in spite of all that, I have already told you that this exact synchronization is really difficult. So sometimes this zero is very difficult to get, which I have earlier explained. Then you can ask me, how do we generate this delay? Well, this is also not a very difficult one. We all know that the propagation velocity of a signal along a transmission line, that is given by this formula. That is velocity of light divided by square root of epsilon r and mu r. For normal signal cables, mu r is 1, the signal cables that we use. So this equation becomes only C by square root of epsilon r. So if this epsilon r is 4 of that cable, that means this cable, whatever insulating material we are using, if it is 4, then the speed of the signal through this cable becomes C by 2. Or in other words, the relative velocity becomes V by C into 100%. Typically, we use Teflon as one of the dielectric of such signal cables, or polyethylene can be also used. And this relative velocity typically is about 60 to 70% of the velocity of light. So therefore, what is the time, per unit length, transit time per unit length? This is the velocity, right? This is the velocity, c by square root of this. So that should be 1 by v. And if the length of the cable is L, then what is the time taken for the signal to transit through the length of the cable? Then T, capital T into capital L. So it becomes capital L by C square root of epsilon r. So therefore, if now C is already known, we know, so we put it. So we can calculate how many microseconds it requires to for that signal to traverse through that cable length. And by controlling this L, we can control this time, so that if required, we will put a 20-meter cable or 30-meter cable, so that this signal on the Y plate will always come, let's say 1 microsecond after the antenna signal. And that is enough for recording the impulse on the Y plate. So this is called a delay cable, which generally incorporates a delay not even 1 microsecond, typically about 0.5 microsecond, which is itself enough for recording by the oscilloscope. So this is a very interesting concept. You can see how very simply the problem has been solved. There was no delay circuit and or electronic circuit, nothing. It's just a cable. Anyway, we have to use a cable from impulse generator to the control room. Anyway, we have to put a cable, and so that cable itself is used to incorporate the delay of propagation of the impulse from the generator point to the CL, and that solves our problem. works perfectly well. Later on, when you come to the laboratory, or if you have the opportunity to come to the laboratory, this would be shown to you that what this cable and all these things. Now, I think now at this point, I have to stop this one, and I will show you something else, a little bit of practical aspects. But you have a question on this part? Anybody has any question?
স্যার যেটাতে পালসটা জেনারেট করছে স্যার একবার বলবেন?
Okay, pulse generator. Good.
Yes, sir, yes.
Okay, let's go back again. Fine, this one, right? This is you are asking?
Yes, sir, yes, sir.
Okay, now see, first thing is this is a pulse transformer. Okay, you can ask me what is a pulse transformer. Normally, our transformers have sinusoidal voltages or sinusoidal currents. But this one works on the principle of pulse. Now, you know that pulse is a DC, right? Pulse is unipolar.
Yes.
I should not say DC, but it is unipolar.
Yes.
So, it is like this, that I have a DC source, whatever be the DC source, and a resistance. What will happen? Some amount of current will flow through the primary.
Yes.
And this current will increase from 0 to a certain value, right?
Yes, sir, yes.
There will be a DIDT.
Yes.
That DIDT will cause some change in flux linkage also. So secondary, some voltage will be generated.
Yes.
But that voltage we don't use. So we have put a capacitor and a switch S2, and S2 is connected to S1. So when S1 is closed, S2 is also closed. So whatever be the voltage that is generated in the secondary side, this capacitor is uncharged. And you know, uncharged capacitor always acts as a short circuit. So secondary will be short circuited. So this voltage will not go to the third electrode.
Yes, sir.
What we'll do, this S1 is pressed for only a few seconds. So this current will be generated, the DC current, and then we'll switch off. Now again current will come down to 0. So again there will be DIDT. Again there will be rate of change of flux. So again there will be induced EMF on the secondary. But now S2 is open. So this capacitor is disconnected. So whatever be the voltage that is generated, now that will go to the third electrode. And this will be a pulse type nature, because this change of flux is only a pulse type. It is a unipolar change of flux. This is the principle of operation of any pulse transformer. You have not heard about pulse transformer?
Yes.
In any course, you have not heard about pulse transformer. Okay. But then please remember, this is very important. In many circuits, we use pulse transformer. So it is not necessary that a transformer has to work with a sinusoidal voltage. Transformers work on the principle of change of flux.
Yes.
So pulse transformers are quite common in many circuits. Any other question? Anybody else? Any question? Let me show you something else then. This is another file I have prepared for you. Where is that? This is to give you some practical essence, the feel of the practical things. This will be a PowerPoint one. I hope it will come on your screen, because some problem you are facing with PPT in the Google. Something is coming on your screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now you can see this is our high voltage lab, no? Jadavpur University high voltage lab. You are third year student, huh? Yes. I think you have not visited our lab. Have you visited any time? No.
Yes, sir. During during our first induction program.
Oh, that was
That
only induction, but you have not done any experiment, I think.
no, sir.
Unfortunate, but because we have experiments in our high voltage lab. Anyway, this is our high voltage lab, and whatever I was explaining is, you can see here that you can see my mouse moving. You see here that brown column. This, there are 4 brown columns. This is actually our impulse generator. And these red columns, they are the extension branches. That this white color boxes are actually capacitors, so that they are connected in parallel. So this is actually is something is our impulse generator in our lab. Then these 2 brown color, small things. You can see my mouse.
Yes.
This one is our load condenser. This one. And this small one is our RE, that external RE. So since this is external, I can change it anytime. So we have other resistances in our lab. So if necessary, we'll disconnect it, connect another one. But this generator, there are certain resistances inside this generator, but that we cannot change. Let me see, another figure is, yeah, this is another view from the floor. This was from the top. So you can here see that not very clear, but anyway, you can get an idea that this is how it works. What I want to tell you a very interesting story. I think this should encourage you at least. Look at these 4 red columns. 4 red columns you can see. Huh? Then you can see this sort of slabs here between the 2 red columns on which these white boxes are there, and in between white boxes there were 3 capacitors in each box, and they are quite heavy. I think that each white box weighs about 300 kilo or 200 and between 250 to 300 kilo each one. This all I tell you my own story. It is in 1985. 1985, I joined as a lecturer in our lab or in our department, whatever you can say. Immediately when I joined, this project was going in our lab that we have received these capacitors from Germany, but now this has to be installed. Now, how? The first thing is you have to put them in place. Then only electrical connection comes. Because I am telling repeatedly, the engineering is always different from just a drawing. First, we have to put them in place. Then comes the electrical connection. How do we put it? And please remember, each one is about 300 kilos. So then 2 boxes is 600 kilo. And this is not a small one. This is quite a big one. You see here? You can see the height? It's quite big one. It's about, I think, maybe 20 feet or maybe 22 feet. Now, when we put it, now if it breaks down, it will be a severe accident. And see, there is a person standing at the corner. If he or she is here, there will be a severe problem. A student is standing here. So I was given the responsibility in 1985 that I have to design this structure. You will laugh at it, but that is exactly the first assignment I got as a lecturer. Now you think of my situation. I am an electrical engineer, did my bachelor's, master's, and then after getting the job, I have to now design this structure. And this is for my own lab, so I cannot say no. I have to do it. And I can't say that you bring an expert to do this, because then I am not an engineer, if you say. And so I have to design it. And in that design, all the shear stress diagram, I think you have done something, right? Bending moment shear stress diagrams, have you done? In your mechanics and others? You must
No,
have
sir.
done. No, in your
We
second
did
year,
not have that subject in our. We only had what do you say, static dynamics.
is it?
Yes, sir.
No, no bending moment diagram, no
No,
shear stress
nothing.
diagram. Oh, this is
I don't
very.
think.
I don't know. I mean, how it can happen. But anyway, in our time, these were there in our course. We did extremely thoroughly all these ones. So, although I was very uncomfortable, but then I started studying, and I went to mechanical engineering department and took some advice. And whatever you are seeing now, that I designed in 1985, 86. And now you see, after almost 40 years, it is standing, and there was not a single accident or anything that has happened. Now, that's what I say is multidisciplinary. Please remember, my students, that exactly what work you will do in your life, you don't know. Okay, you are studying electrical engineering, fine. But don't think that just knowing some software or knowing some circuit theory or knowing some machines or etc. makes you a perfect engineer. No, engineering means many other things. So this is just one thing I tell you from my absolutely own life's experience. And I'm very proud that even after 40 years, this is there in the lab. And I think even after I retire, it will be there. So at least something I contributed in the lab. By the way, this is a sphere gap, big one. You can see here now my mouse moving.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
This
sir.
is a sphere gap of diameter 1 meter. Huge sphere gap in our lab. So we use it only for extremely high voltage measurement. By the way, this impulse generator you see, it can generate up to 1.4 million volts. 1.4 million volts. So if you have to measure that, you can't use any other voltmeter other than this sphere gap voltmeter. Now you will be quite surprised how sphere gap can be a voltmeter. But I can tell you this is a voltmeter. Normally when I say voltmeter, what image comes on your mind? It's a box. There will be an indication, whether digital or whatever. But here, these two sphere gaps are basically a sphere voltmeter. I will explain in my second part of the course that how sphere gap can act as a voltmeter. Very interesting approach that we take. Okay, so now, see, this is a power transformer. Now, you might have seen, but I will ask you a couple of questions. You have to answer me. For example, if you see my mouse, I hope you can see. Now you can see this cylindrical object on top of the transformer. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me what is it?
A conservator tank.
Conservator tank. Quite good. Now, this conservator tank, why is it used?
Because when the heat is produced, some wire may expense or due to expansion for giving some extra space, something.
Okay, it is, when you are quite correct. Let me explain it in this way. See, this is the main tank. Right? Now, our all winding, etc., is within the main tank. That is somewhere here. Now, that tank should always be full of oil, because if there is an air gap, that will be serious. So, but at the same time, you are correct that when the temperature goes up and down, because that will depend on load. When the load increases, temperature increases. When the load increases, temperature decreases. So evening load very high, oil temperature goes up. The middle of the night, load goes down, temperature goes down. So oil will expand and contract. But we have to give some space for expansion and contraction. But at the same time, you have to ensure that under no circumstances air should come in. So this conservator tank is used, and it is never full. It is half full with oil. So when it expands, that additional volume that will be taken by oil, and when it contracts, again oil will come down, but it will never come to the tank. It will be a little lower surface. So the air volume will increase or decrease. Then there will be a question that when you oil expands, it will push air out of conservator. When oil contracts, the air will come in. But when air will come in, along with that moisture will come in. How to protect that?
Sir, there have a breather. In this breather, there are some put silica gel which absorb the moisture.
Good. But this is an old concept, first of all. Okay, breather will be there. But breather is not enough to protect against the moisture. Nowadays, it is completely different concept. This is called a diaphragm separated tank. That means it is like a balloon sort of diaphragm, right? In the middle of the tank, there will be a diaphragm. It is flexible diaphragm. So when the oil expands, it pushes the diaphragm up and air goes out. And there is a breather. But even when the air comes in, silica cannot take out all the moisture. So moisture will come in. But since there is a diaphragm, the air and oil will not touch each other. So now we have what is called a diaphragm sealed conservators. So that is very good, protection against the moisture. Now you can see my mouse here. Here you can see top of it. Achha, what are these rings? Can you see here? You can see 3, 1, 2, 3 rings are here, or 4 here. What are these rings? This is what I already told you. That is the grading rings. I have tried to explain earlier, right? That by grading ring, we try to make the potential distribution uniform. This is done for these high voltage components, that we put these rings so that this is actually for this vertical component. Can you tell me what is this vertical component from to the top? You look at my mouse. This entire vertical component, what is this? Connected to the terminal of the transformer. Here you see the terminal of the transformer. Look at my mouse. Then you have the conductor. And then you have this vertical component. What is this one? This is actual electrical engineering, right? What is this component called? Give some suggestion. You should not remain silent. What is your idea? What is this? This is called lightning arrestor. That means this conductor will be connected to the transmission line on the left side. And that will go for another 100 kilometers. So lightning can come, or rather lightning over voltage can come, but that should not be allowed to reach the transformer terminal. So before the transformer terminal, we have put a lightning arrestor so that if a lightning comes from the left side, at this point, it will be bypassed to off. It will not reach the transformer terminal. Right? Without lightning arrestors, transformers are not used because this is a very expensive transformer. See, like it is an 8 MVA, not a very high transformer, but still quite expensive. You can see here rectangular blocks. You can look at my mouse. What are these?
Radiating.
Radiating tank.
These are the radiator banks, right? We call it radiator banks. So this is called forced oil cooling. So oil will be pumped from the tank and it will flow through that and go back to the tank. And in the process, it will radiate the heat and cooling will work. What is this one? This turret type structure here, you can see here. What is this one?
Oil bushing.
This is the bushing, because see, this is the conductor, right? Coming from the high voltage line, and then here it will go into the transformer tank. So that's the bushing, and on the other side also you have the bushing, you can see. So one will be high voltage bushing, the other will be the low voltage bushing. So it's a 33 by 11 kV transformer. So this is the 33 kV side and this is the 11 kV side. So looking at the bushing, you can say which one at the high voltage, which one at a transformer. And if I ask, tell me which one is HV side, don't look at anything, just look at the bushing. Always the high voltage bushing will be much bigger, so you can always say that which one is the high voltage side. So these are the typical components, and inside the transformer, of course, we cannot see, so we can't see. This is our testing transformer in our lab. I have taught you testing transformer. So this is our testing transformer. You can see here, it is a 250 kV transformer, and this vertical block is a capacitor. It's just a capacitor. It looks like this, but it's just a capacitor. It is used for measuring this high voltage. That means we have a capacitive potential divider. This is the high voltage capacitor. Low voltage capacitor is at the bottom. It's a small one. So you can see that just one capacitor of 250 kV is so big. So can you have a 1000 kV capacitor? It's not possible. Just not possible. And it is a relatively smaller testing transformer. By the way, what is it here? This one. Anyway, I think this photograph I have already shown you, right? Is it I have shown you earlier? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Now I go to this other one. See again the static shield. See how it is used. And you can see here the conductors are quite large in diameter. You can see here my mouse. Now these are because we want to reduce corona, so that we have increased the diameter of the conductors. No other reason. This is not for current carrying. For current carrying, you don't require such big diameter. It is only to reduce the corona. Okay, then static shield application again. This is the high voltage transmission line. And here you can see this is the string insulator. And on the high voltage side, you can see the rings, which I have already told you. These are called corona shield, static shield, corona ring. So many names are there. On the left side diagram, you can see the two rings here. This is a what is called a string insulator, and you can see these rings. So typically, we always use these shields. This is a bushing, a broken bushing. I have taken the photo intentionally. That what is there inside. So you can see that what you see from outside is only called a housing of the bushing cover. That means the transformer already I have shown you. Okay, this one, what you see is actually called only the housing or the bushing cover. Inside is something like this. So this is the conductor that goes in, and the most critical part is where it enters the tank. This is the tank. This photo is from the transformer tank. You can see the ground is quite low here. You can see the transformer is quite big, or rather quite large. So this photo is taken from the transformer top. So you can see the height. So this is the point where the conductor goes into the tank. So a special design is made at this point. Rest of the part, it is primarily the bushing cover, and of course, this space is never kept air. It is filled with oil. So that is typically a bushing, but bushings have many different types. This is only one type bushing. There are several different types. Yeah, interesting the photo here. This is called a transformer bank. Now you can see here, this is one transformer bank. This is 2, this is 3. Now, why is it so? Actually, when the transformer rating becomes too high, for example, I have, the Faraka super thermal. Every generator is rated at 500 megawatt. Too high for one transformer. We cannot handle 500 megawatt in one transformer, and we should not. Because if anything goes wrong, there will be a severe problem. So what we do, we take smaller transformers, and then individual phases are just single phase transformers. And here you can see two transformers in parallel makes phase A. Second one, phase B. Third one, phase C. So what happens now, 500 megawatt, first of all, is divided into 3 parts. And then each part is divided into 2. So each one comes down 60 megawatt. Or not 60 megawatts, some 80 megawatts, 85 megawatts. That is manageable for one unit. Another advantage is that if we do it like this, Oh, by the way, you can ask me that how we are doing it. No, very simple. See, this star delta connection can be done externally also. It's not necessary you have to do it inside the transformer. So the connections are done externally, either in star or in delta. But the advantage is that at least one of this unit I can keep it as a spare. So that if anything goes wrong, immediately we replace it. So that our generating station doesn't go down. We can continuously supply the power. This is the concept of transformer bank. And probably you have studied also that even if it is a delta, I mean, it is a delta connection, if any of the phase, entire phase goes down, still we can use it as a V connection. You know that. Have you studied V connection? There is something called the V connection of three-phase transformers. Have you studied V connection? V for vector. V connection, three-phase transformer, V connection. Have you studied?
Um,
Yes or no? You are not answering me. It seems you have not studied. Probably otherwise. Anyway, there is something called a V connection of three-phase transformer. So even if any one phase goes out, both of these, still we can supply power at 66.6% of its capacity. It is possible. We can do that. Then this photo already I have shown you that this is a cascade transformer. This is at the Central Power Research Institute in Hyderabad. So this is each one is 750 kV. So together we have 1,500 kV. This is the input side. This is the control room. This building. So everything is controlled from there. This is just for photo taking. And when we test, the objects are on the left side, so that any high voltage we can generate here. They have extremely high capacity. This is another view. This photograph also I have probably shown you. This one is very interesting. This is a series resonance high voltage generator. This is a 260 kV 83 ampere resonant testing set. So you can see this resonant testing set. So this object is being tested with the help of resonator circuit, and these are the L. Say L, you can see this is a coil, and then C will be there. Not everything is visible, but this is how it looks like. This is the 1200 kV AC transmission line, which is being used in the Bina circuit of Madhya Pradesh, and this is being tested by that 1500 kV generator set at CPRI Hyderabad. Very interestingly, how the conductor look like. If you look at my mouse, you see the conductor. I don't know whether you can see it, but this inset, it gives you the conductor and image. This is called a, I think 10 conductor bundle is there. So you can see that instead of a single conductor, we have used 10 conductor in such a way that it becomes a circular or cylindrical shape, but it's not a full cylinder. Because you know that current doesn't flow through the entire cross section. It flows through the surface because of skin effect. So if I use one conductor of 10 times the cross section will not be used properly. But here, the skin effect will be reduced because the current is divided into 10 conductors. Secondly, if I increase only the area of cross section by 10 times, then the diameter will increase. Diameter only increases by the square root of that. Whereas here, see the effective diameter has increased significantly, quite large, so that the corona will be reduced, because corona depends on the effective diameter of the conductor. So by means of this bundle conductor, we have reduced the corona, or at the same time, the current carrying capacity has been increased. Never confuse between bundle conductor and twisted conductor. Like you might have studied something called aluminum core steel reinforced conductors. They are typically twisted conductors. But that does not mean bundle conductors. Bundle conductors are like this. There are two conductor bundle, four conductor bundle like that, and this is the largest one, the 10 conductor bundle. This is the multi-stage HVDC generator, which I have already explained to you. This is a 1000 kV HVDC generator in CPRI Hyderabad. I have already explained to you that, but this is actually that. And you can see here why I was telling that we have to have multiple stages. Can you imagine the height? If you just think about this people's height, if you take say 6 feet, can you imagine how big it is? This is the issue in the real life, that if things are not all that so small, which we can have in the lab. Just some of the things I would like to show you: circuit breaker and isolator arrangement. I think you know that circuit breakers are always used with isolator. Now here, this one is the circuit breaker, this brown T. And this one here on the left side, this horizontal arm is the isolator. Actually, this is a called a double break type isolator. That means there are two arms, one on the right, one on the left. So they rotate when they want to open. They rotate by 90 degrees. Both these, one in the anti-clockwise direction, the other in the clockwise direction. So then this isolator will be open. But isolators are never opened on load condition. First, the circuit breaker is open because this is used for actually breaking the current. And once it is open, then the circuit is already open. But now, think about it, that this circuit breaker is open, but isolator is not open. So this left side of the circuit breaker is still connected to the transmission line, and that is still having high voltage because that is supplied from some substation on the left, which is not switched off. So can I work here for some maintenance? Answer is no, I cannot, because this is still connected to high voltage. So what I have to do? I have to open this isolator. Now if I open this isolator, then the transmission line is connected to the left side of the isolator, but not to the right side. Now this circuit breaker, I can do the operation or maintenance operation. So circuit breakers are always having isolators on both the sides, left side and right side, because on both sides there could be connected transmission lines. And I already probably told you that in real life, nothing is ABC or phase 1, phase 2. In real life, we do it by colors, and that's why we say it is red, yellow, blue phase. So you can see here. Can you see here red color? Here in the middle.
Yes.
So this is the red circuit breaker.
Yes, sir.
This is the yellow phase circuit breaker. This is the blue phase circuit breaker. This is how we identify that which conductor is red phase, which conductor is white phase. So you can immediately identify. Otherwise, there is no way you can identify red, yellow, blue. So this is typically we do it. Generally, always some terminal will be colored. The conductors are never colored. Please don't confuse. Conductors are never colored. Typically, terminals are colored. This is another circuit breaker. There is a slight difference here. See here you see the bottom, this metallic structure at the bottom is earth. Then this vertical part is pure insulator, just insulator. The top part is the breaker. This is called a live tank circuit breaker because the circuit breaker, entire circuit breaker is live always. Whereas this is called a dead tank circuit breaker because see, the tank is at the bottom where the breaking part takes place. That is at the earth potential. And you see the line comes in, goes to the circuit breaker. But now since this is dead tank, you have two bushings here. So incomer goes through the bushing of the breaker, and outgoing one comes out of the bushing, goes out. And here also, if you look on the back side, you can see the isolator here after the breaker. This side you cannot see, only part of it you can see here. This is again an isolator, and I was telling you that there will be two arms. So you can see here two arms. This is the isolator in open position. And when they close, they will rotate by 90 degrees, then they will close. That is exactly what I was trying to tell you in this diagram. See, in the middle they are connected when they close, and now in the middle they are open. They have moved by 90 degrees. These are the isolators, and here you can see again RYB, the three isolator positions. Here you can see the CTs and PTs, and you can clearly see the red yellow blue. Here you can clearly see, right, that RYB phases. Looking at it, if somebody asks that, can you tell me which one is CT and which one is PT? Is it possible? The answer is yes, but you have to know it. How? I will explain it with the help of this blue color. It will be easy because you can see it clearly. Look at this blue color here in the middle here. Look at it. You can see the conductor is going into it and another conductor is coming out of it. So there are two conductors you can clearly see. One is going in, one is going out. This is always typically the current transformer, because current transformer primary is connected in series with the line. So therefore you have these two terminals of the primary. And the primary winding is inside, which is in series with the line. The secondary is there also inside. So anywhere where you can see these two lines going in and coming out is actually a CT. What about this one, this blue one? You can see here, not two lines are going in. This is simply going on top of it. So that means this is a parallel connection. Clearly, this is a parallel connection. That means there is a primary winding and one terminal of the primary is connected to the high voltage. The other terminal of the primary is earth at the bottom. So this is in parallel with the line. So therefore, this is PT. So look at it. If there are two terminals, one going in and one coming out, it should be a CT. And if you find that there is only one terminal at the top, so it's a parallel connection, it should be a PT. That's how we identify CT and PT. I mean, from any power engineer knows it, but since you are third year students, I want to tell you that these are the practical things. This is again single phase transformer bank. You can see this is a single phase transformer because there is one bushing, high voltage bushing and low voltage bushing. And this is the lightning arrestor. And all lightning arresters are provided with a grading ring. There are reasons, because if the voltage distribution is not uniform, there will be serious trouble. Again, a lightning arrestor, but this is a three-phase transformer. You can see three bushings. And so therefore, three lightning arresters are there. These are the lightning arresters. And then after that, again, by the same logic, you can see one where one is going in, the other is coming out. So this must be a CT, if you look at the connection. And this is called a gapless lightning arrestor, which is slightly beyond your course, so I will not go into that. But what I will try to show you is slightly different. Just one more thing to give you, this is all to give you a practical, idea. Let me see where I have it. This is something, where is it? This is a video I want to show you. Must be here. Correct. What happens if you open an isolator under loaded condition? I told you that isolator should not be. I already told you that an isolator should never be opened under loaded condition. It is always the circuit breaker which should be opened. What happens if an isolator is opened with current? That means loaded condition. So I will show you a video. First of all, I have to open it. then I have to share you. Let me see if I can share you. I hope it will be coming. Something is coming on your screen, and a substation.
Yes.
Okay, now there will be a video. I mean, how it will do it. See here. This is the something that happens. See, you see here, this is the isolator. Look at my mouse. At the middle, they are connected. Now, the right side will open in the clockwise direction, left side will open in anti-clockwise direction. But now this is loaded condition. And in this loaded condition, this is being opened. And look at the arc that has been formed. And look at the length and etc. I mean, unbelievable. So therefore, you can see that why isolators are not opened under loaded condition. So these are the things that you study in the class, but this is exactly what happens in a substation. Now, that sort of arc, if it happens in substation, there will be very, very severe accident. So that's why we don't do it. So please remember that whatever we try to tell you in the class, there is a practical reflection. And that's why sometimes I'm feeling very dejected. I mean, I must tell you, every class I'm telling that I'm really dejected with my students. I mean, right now I am seeing only 13 students joining the class. Now, my question is very simple. If this is an interview for your job, I think this will be 64 or 94. I mean, don't give me all those, useless logics that my net is not connected, my this and that. I mean, somehow I'm feeling that you people have lost touch with studying. Somehow. I mean, how it has happened, I don't know. I came back after 5 years and I'm finding something strange has happened here. And I feel very, 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 very dejected that why students are not interested in study. I mean, everybody will get a job, everybody will have a career later on, but when I find 13 students attending a class, I don't feel like taking your class. I tell you, I mean, don't feel like. I mean, why should I take your class? I can simply mail you some notes and finish it. I mean, why am every day coming and taking your class? I am really something. I mean, I feel very sad. I joined Jadavpur University as a student in 1979. This is the 42nd year I am in Jadavpur University. I have never seen this type of Jadavpur University behavior. Unbelievable. So you can log out. Thank you.